History is important, so important in fact that we humans often feel the need to immortalize it in stone, steel, and concrete. Some of these historical monuments are truly a sight to behold, so join me for today's video as we're going to explore 15 amazing monuments. Number 15. The Berlin Wall. The Cold War was a difficult time period for the people of Berlin, as it was marked by the walled partition of the city into an eastern and western section. Completely cutting off this western area from the Soviet Union, the 155-kilometer-long Berlin Wall was absolutely gargantuan, although in 1990 it was finally demolished. The demolition has allowed the two areas of the city to reunite, yet while it's certainly the case that most of the wall was destroyed, parts of it have remained up. Popularly known as the East Side Gallery, this area is made up of a series of 105 permanent murals, all of which are painted on pieces of the wall. This system of wall fragments forms an open-air gallery of sorts, with the works being painted by street artists from all over the world. The end result is a monument to the past and artwork that symbolizes the hope for a better future. And given how cool the whole thing is, I'd highly suggest visiting this set of mini monuments the next time you're in Berlin. Number 14. Christ the Redeemer. While it's common for statues of biblical figures to be found in churches, it is quite a bit rarer for them to be located in the secular context. Yet that's exactly the case with the Christ the Redeemer. It's located in the city of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. This massive statue of Jesus with his arms outstretched has an interesting history. You see, the idea to create a religious statue on top of Mount Corcovado first came about in the 1850s when it was proposed to Princess Isabel by a local priest. Ostensibly, it was built to commemorate the princess's freeing of the Brazilian slaves, but initially the idea was rejected. However, in 1920, when the idea was revived and after securing much of the funding from Brazilian Catholics, the building began. When completed in 1931, the end result was a massive 30-meter-tall Art Deco statue. And while there are some who criticize the statue due to it seeming to blur the line between the church and state, it is for the most part still enjoyed by citizens and tourists alike to this very day. Number 13. The Brandenburg Gate. While Berlin is a city filled with incredible monuments, one of the most spectacular is the Brandenburg Gate. It was constructed between 1788 and 1791 under the orders of Prussian King Frederick William II. It was built to represent peace after the suppression of unrest in the Netherlands. It's modeled off of the Athenian Acropolis. It features 12 large Doric columns that form 5 passageways, a classical style, and most iconically, a chariot drawn by 4 horses on top. Driven by the Roman goddess of victory, this chariot is symbolic of the victory of Germany over its enemies, and this is the symbolism that's gotten it into a bit of trouble in the past. You see, after Napoleon captured Berlin in 1806, he passed through the gates during his triumphant military procession and took the chariot back to Paris, where it remained in French hands until Napoleon's defeat in 1814. After this event, the chariot was returned, and ever since, the Brandenburg Gate has at times been damaged by warfare, but has ultimately stayed strong and intact, and today it continues to be a symbol of German peace and unification. Number 12. The Motherland Calls. The Soviet Union was easily one of the most powerful states during the 20th century, and one monument that stands to glorify its strength in battle is a statue known as the Motherland Calls. Part of a group of 3 monuments spread across the former USSR, the Motherland Calls was made as a tribute to those who died during the Battle of Stalingrad. A set of 200 steps, which represents the 200 days of battle, lead up to the monument, which stands apart in more ways than one. After all, its height of 85 meters makes it the tallest statue in Europe, and given the figure it represents, the tallest statue of a woman in the world. Who is this woman, you may ask? Well, you see, as the name suggests, it's supposed to represent Mother Russia, but in terms of the model, it was widely believed that it was based off the body of discus thrower Nina Dombadze and the face of the sculptor's wife Vera. As such, you're probably going to agree that the sculptor won the Husband of the Year award for immortalizing his wife in such an incredible way. Number 11. The Eiffel Tower. Of all the monuments out there, few are as romanticized as the Eiffel Tower. Designed by famed engineer and entrepreneur Gustave Eiffel, it was chosen out of more than 100 building proposals and built between 1877 and 1879 for Paris's famed 1889 World Fair, which was held to celebrate the 100th year anniversary of the French Revolution. Made of wrought iron, it's held together with over 2.5 million rivets and was built in sections so each could be assembled on the ground before being lifted into place by cranes. The end result was absolutely stunning, and I'd say that the Eiffel Tower's design was a fitting choice given the theme of the event. After all, its industrial lattice-like structure revolutionized the way we use iron in the creation of buildings, while also symbolizing the advances of modern industrial design. So it really should come as little surprise that it was not only well received at the time, but has also continued to be well received today. So if you ever do get a chance to visit Paris, there's absolutely no way you should miss out on the very least of seeing a glimpse of the tower, and if time permits, taking an elevator ride to the viewing gallery. Number 10. The Arc de Triomphe. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, France was in a state of near-constant war. After all, between the wars of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, French soldiers were kept busy. And while there were several ups and downs to the French who fought and died in them, they were considered to be national heroes. It was for this reason that the Arc de Triomphe was created. It was commissioned by Napoleon in 1806 after his victory over the Austrian Empire at Austerlitz. The Arc de Triomphe had its design changed several times over the course of its construction, but by the time it was completed in 1836, the essence of the structure was more or less the same. Located at the western end of the Champs-Élysées, in an area known as the Place de l'Étoile, its inner and outer surfaces are inscribed with the names of all French victories and generals, while its exterior has several sculptures and murals that symbolize the glory and freedom of France. It also includes a small military museum and France's most famous tomb of the unknown soldier. Therefore, if you're a fan of French martial history, then the Arc de Triomphe is a must-see on your next visit. Number 9. The Statue of Liberty. While the United States is home to its fair share of monuments, few are as iconic as the Statue of Liberty. Erected in 1886, it was built as a symbol of the special relationship between the republics of France and the United States. And while the Franco-Prussian War delayed the project and made it impossible to have it completed by the 100th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the joint partnership was still a success as a statue was eventually erected. However, quite a few roadblocks had to be overcome in the process. You see, the idea was that France would finance the creation of the statue and that the United States would find the location and finance the pedestal. While France held up its end of the bargain, the United States came very close to canceling the project, and it was only through the intervention of famed publicist Joseph Pulitzer of the New York World newspaper that enough funding was secured to make it happen. Once up, it immediately became one of New York City's main attractions, representing freedom and liberty. It was one of the first things that many new immigrants would see when coming to America, helping to reinforce the idea of the American dream. And while there are now far less immigrants that come to the United States through New York's harbor, its symbolism has remained potent to this very day. Number 8. The Washington Monument. Obelisks are easily one of the coolest types of monuments out there, and while many exist in the old world, the coolest in North America is the one and only Washington Monument. Built to commemorate American President George Washington, construction of it first began all the way back in 1848. But factors such as the Civil War and lack of funding meant that the progress was slow and continuously halted. However, in 1885 it was finally completed, and the end result was pretty spectacular. Coming in at just shy of 170 meters tall and composed of marble, granite, and bluestone gneiss. It's the world's tallest obelisk, and from 1884 to 1889, it was the world's tallest structure before being overtaken by the Eiffel Tower. And while it's had some hiccups since then, after all it suffered significant earthquake damage in 2011, it's always been repaired and is ultimately still standing today. Now, the cool thing about the monument is that it's adorned with 193 memorial stones, with each being donated by individuals, organizations, or governments, and featuring a personal engraved message or symbol. It also has an internal spiral staircase and an observation deck, with that deck allowing for incredible views of the National Mall. As such, if you ever get the chance to go to Washington, D.C., you should certainly plan a trip to the Washington Monument. Number 7. Trajan's Column. Few empires were quite as expansive or as incredible as that of the ancient Romans. Expanding as far east as Armenia and as far west as Spain and England, the empire was absolutely massive, and one of the emperors that holds a lot of responsibility for its expansion is the Emperor Trajan. A skilled general and administrator, his reign was one of the most prosperous in ancient Roman history, and one of his exploits that was perhaps most famous was for his conquering the Dacians. Hailing from the area around modern-day Romania, the Dacians were a fierce enemy, and so after defeating them in battle, Trajan saw fit to commemorate his victory with the erection of a massive column in Rome. Erected sometime between the years 107 and 113 AD, it comes in at a height of 35 meters and was constructed from a series of 20 colossal Carrara marble drums. While this material alone makes the column impressive, what truly sets it apart are its engravings. Spiraling around the entirety of the column, they depict the events of the war in great detail, with the lower half of the column corresponding to the First Dacian War and the top half to the Second. This makes it an impressive piece of both art and architecture, and if you'd like to see it yourself, take a trip to the Imperial Forum in Rome. Number 6. The Victoria Memorial. The Victoria Memorial is a monument that, while incredible in scope, certainly evokes mixed feelings. On one hand, it is visually stunning. Constructed between 1906 and 1921 by the colonial British government, it's dedicated to the memory of Queen Victoria, who at one time was considered to be the Empress of India. Holding the title of being the world's largest monument to be dedicated to a monarch, it was built in line with Indo-Saracenic revivalist style, with this being a style often used by British architects in India throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Made of white Makrana marble and expanding for a length of over 100 meters, the building is certainly grandiose, and this grandeur is accented by its ornate facade and beautiful sculpture of Queen Victoria inside. As such, for all intents and purposes, it is a beautiful building. However, it's also been a long-lasting symbol of oppression, a reminder to many Indians of the painful colonial past. There have been calls to rename the monument after someone actually born in India, with figures such as Netaji or Asad Hind Fauj often being suggested. However, there are others that see this as not a reclamation of the colonial past, but as a way of warming up to it, as some argue that naming a Victorian colonial building after a famous Indian patriot is an insult. Yet the reality is that only time will tell whether or not this name change will one day happen, but for now, the plan is for it to keep it its old name and its old meaning. Number 5. The Taj Mahal. Few events are quite as tragic as the death of a spouse, and while many have had the misfortune of feeling this pain, few have taken it quite like Emperor Shah Jahan. As the leader of the Mughal Empire, he brought India into a golden age in terms of architecture, culture, and literature, and so when his wife Mumtaz Mahal died in 1631, it's fitting that he immediately commissioned one of the most incredible memorials known to mankind. Completed more than 2 decades later in 1653, the Taj Mahal is widely considered to be the greatest work of Indo-Islamic architecture, and for good reason. On one hand, the building itself is just gorgeous, combining a mix of solids and voids, concave and convex areas, and arches and domes. It truly is an aesthetic marvel, with the whole thing really coming together thanks to its 35-meter-high white marble dome and the 4 ornate towers that surround it. However, what makes the Taj Mahal a masterpiece is not just the architecture, but the horticulture. You see, rather than place the Taj Mahal in the center of a garden, as would have been more standard, it is instead at one end of a quadripartite garden, adding depth and perspective that make the building such an imposing sight. If the exterior wasn't cool enough, the interior is also spectacular. Organized around an octagon-shaped marble chamber, it features beautiful low-relief carvings and semi-precious stones, making it by far one of the most impressive resting places on the planet. So it should come as little surprise that between 7 to 8 million people visit the Taj Mahal each year, making it one of the most visited monuments in the world. Number 4. The Altar of the Fatherland. While Rome is well loved for sites such as the Colosseum, the Pantheon, and the Trevi Fountain, one attraction that has more mixed reviews is the Altar of the Fatherland. Also known as the Victor Emmanuel II Monument, it's either loved or hated, and it's easy to see both arguments depending on how you look at it. On one hand, it's an immense patriotic symbol of the Italian Republic, built between 1885 and 1935 to honor King Victor Emmanuel II of Italy and the act of Italian unification. It's located more or less smack dab in the center of Rome and has its fair share of symbolism. For example, its grandeur represents the strength of a unified Italy. Its 16 columns and 16 representative statues symbolize the country's 16 regions, and its massive Victor Emmanuel II statue at the front represents the ultimate unification of Italy under one ruler. Meanwhile, it's got statues and designs that represent prominent but arguably less central messages, such as the relief on the left that represents the triumph of labor, and the relief on the right that symbolizes the triumph of the patriotic love, with both converging towards the statue of the goddess Rome. As such, it goes without saying that this monument is very multi-layered. Yet while some see this as a positive, others see it as a negative. There are many out there who believe that the altar is overly complicated, tacky, and made in poor taste. In fact, some have even nicknamed it the wedding cake due to its shape and proportions, which for all intents and purposes isn't the most flattering of things to say about it. So now I throw it back to you. You guys like the monument, or do you think it's a bit too over the top? Let me know down in the comments below. Number 3. Mount Rushmore National Memorial. While most monuments are sculptures, statues, or buildings, Mount Rushmore is one of the few to be an entire mountain. Sculpted between 1927 and 1941 in the rural state of South Dakota, it has a rather strange history. You see, at the time, South Dakota was a heavily indebted state, and in order to get out of its rut, federal funding was granted to create a giant tourist attraction there. The original idea was to carve the entire bodies of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln into the marble, while also maintaining a climate-controlled Hall of Records that would store the Declaration of Independence and U.S. Constitution. However, sculptor Gutzon Borglum passed away in 1941, and while his son Lincoln attempted to revitalize the project, a lack of funding meant that the presidential heads were the only parts of the mountain to be completed. Now, on one hand, Mount Rushmore is quite popular. After all, it welcomes 2 million people a year. However, on the other hand, it's also the site of a contentious standoff between the United States government and the Oglala Lakota Native Americans. That's because in 1868, the Fort Laramie Treaty promised the land to this Native American group in perpetuity. But after gold and silver was found in the region, it was promptly taken from them. The Lakota fought the government for years, and in 1981 were finally awarded $1 billion by the Supreme Court for the unlawful land grab. However, the Oglala Lakota have never accepted the money, as they don't want the restitution but their land back. Therefore, the fact that it was not only taken, but the Oglala Lakota turned into a monument with the heads of those who oppressed them makes Mount Rushmore a place that many refuse to visit. However, I do want to know what you think. Would you visit Mount Rushmore, or do you think it's a better idea to simply boycott it? Let me know in the comments below. Egyptian Pyramids. When it comes to monuments, few are as recognizable as the Egyptian pyramids. Built between 2630 BC and about 650 BC, they were the burial grounds of Egypt's royal family. And due to this period of time being so extended, a total of 118 were constructed. Towering to heights of up to 150 meters, the Pyramid of Giza and the other 117 members of the Egyptian pyramid family are incredible. So if you ever get the chance to go to Egypt, a visit to the pyramids is an absolute must. I'll see you next time. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.